Roy, how are you today?
I'm doing great today. Thanks, Ryan.
I am excited for more than one reason to have you on the show. One, and I'll kind of set the groundwork, and then we can flow into the bullets that you and I exchanged prior. Was following you on LinkedIn, which you were actually providing value other than just doing infomercials like everybody else is deciding to do these days. And you had posted a post about celebrating your anniversary as an ESOP. Ding, ding, ding! I obviously had to reach out because from Ohio, or where my partner's from, and I was super excited. And one of the cool parts was when you had notified me that it was your family that did the ESOP, and you were part of the process. So it's a completely
Yeah.
different lens on this that I know we haven't covered so far, and I think a lot of people have got some good questions that they're probably thinking about. What are the other stakeholders when you're doing an ESOP? All the different people to think about.
Yeah.
Before we dive into some of the meat of it, let's just kind of give me me and the listeners, the Cliff Note version of you, your background, and how you got to where you are.
Well, I grew up in Florida. My wife and I met in college. And after college, we moved here to Columbus, Ohio, and got married. And about 3 weeks before our wedding, I started working for her family's business. And that was 30 years ago in May.
Were you
So
trying to
it's
jeopardize your wedding? I mean, what was
uh,
it?
I was thankful to have a job. So when I went away to college, I told my dad, I said, if I can't find a job when I graduate, I may move back home. And he said, no, you won't. So I needed to go forward.
So you've been working for the business how long now?
Just over 30 years.
Over 30 years. So, and once you what is the business, and what's the kind of the overall setup of the company?
Well, the company's name is Hopkins Printing. We're a regional commercial printing company. So we're dealing with hospitals, banks, insurance, manufacturing, trade associations, and we do B2B and B2C sales literature.
Okay.
So if you buy a new house and you have a pocket folder with all of your closing documents, that's the type of thing we print, or the real shiny, glossy pieces that come in the mail. So those are kind of core of what we do.
Offset or digital? You're bringing me back to my old space.
Actually, we started offset, and in 2007 we bought our first digital press, but we're still primarily offset because the longer run projects are more economical on offset. But we do about 15% of our business is digital.
Got it. So, when you and I are going back and forth, and we can kind of take this in whatever order that you think makes most amount of sense, because it was the family business that then you said you were part of the decision making. So I'm just kind of curious, like when was it started, and how to get to the point where there was this question of what to do with the business?
Well, my father-in-law started it in 1974 in his basement. So he claims he went through a midlife. He doesn't claim. He says he went through a midlife crisis and started something new in his life. He had always been into photography, and the basis of printing is connected very closely to the basis of photography. So in the middle 70s, he started that and worked out of his house for a while, and then went to a small storefront downtown Columbus, went to a second one, and then moved just south of the city in the early 80s. And then we moved to our current facility in 2000. So we're 45 or so years old, about 100 people.
Okay,
So
cool.
it's a nice size regional manufacturing business.
So it's funny. I don't know if you read the E-Myth, where they call it the entrepreneurial seizure, where the
Yeah.
artist or the technician decides to become a business owner.
Well, he started as an art. Well, he enjoyed photography. He actually worked at a manufacturing business here in Columbus, making roller bearings.
Oh,
And then he kind of has an artistic edge to him. And that is how he started. And he was a true printer probably till we got to about 80 employees. and then he became a business person. So he, at that point, you start having to develop a management team and
HR, accounting.
planning, HR, and sales management. So it's what he does now. He still works 3 days a week. It's all business. How do we allocate capital, equipment, hiring, growth plans, marketing, things like that.
So, and I want to put a pin in that so we can come back to that, because I think that's going to be an important discussion point for a lot of entrepreneurs that are figuring out, like, what role do I want? What relationship do I want with my business? Because, and even as we set the stage of this, Roy, one of the things that I talk a lot about, and I don't know if we covered it in the Jack Stack podcast, the difference between your management role, what you get paid to do, and ownership, which is your equity, because those have two completely different paths that can unfold. And an ESOP follows, or it allows you to be more creative with how and when you do each of those unfold each of those journeys. So I want to make sure we kind of go back to that, but curious on the context or in the timeline is, so, you've been there for 30 years. When you started, how big was the business? And then what were the expectations when you started with your father-in-law? And then how did those evolve over time?
When I started back in 1990, we had roughly 50 employees doing $6 million in sales. Last year, we had just over 100 people doing $19 million in sales.
Yep.
But I would say, I explained my relationship with Jim, my father-in-law, is in 30 years, we've had 2 or 3 real arguments. And by the next day, we've gotten over it. So it's been a good long-term relationship. And he started me at the bottom, and I worked in multiple different departments. We have a creative side of the business, and that was the first area that I did any management in. And then in the mid-90s, I went into the sales side of it. And now that's my primary responsibility is sales and marketing. But it's been over 20 years that I've been on that side of it. I'm still involved. If we do any equipment purchases, I'm involved, but I'm not the final decision maker. I'm part of a small team that makes those decisions.
Super cool. So when you started and as you go, so I think you're definitely an anomaly. The fact that you've only had 2 or 3 arguments, unless there's a bunch of unsaid arguments that are there. I don't get that as the takeaway here, but was there clear expectations about roles and then ownership? And as you evolved and the business went from, like we were talking about, from like a passion to, hey, this is an actual business now.
Yeah.
What was that evolution like between you two before the ESOP took place?
Well, I think one of the things that has been pretty good at Hopkins is, even though my wife's family owned the company, the roles that they played in the company, nobody was paid more than our local association's wage and salary surveys say. So there was, there were no fancy cars, there were no memberships, there were no vacation homes. So he always ran the business as if he was a hired manager almost. Yeah. Now, he ran it fiscally real conservative, and he does benefit from the ownership of the company. So obviously you benefit, but from a kind of a functional day-to-day, we run pretty clean against our trade association ratios.
Well, what I find, I want to put a big exclamation point on that, because that's not a common situation. I think it's getting more common, but there was a podcast interview I did, Roy, called Solving Problems Through Payroll. So many people, because they don't understand valuations or the value of that asset, they solve all their problems through, okay, Roy, let's have a good Thanksgiving. I'm going to give you an extra raise, or give you that extra car that we can write off through the business. So all the solving of the problems comes through annual cash flow, instead of, hey, this thing is worth something, but that's different than what we're getting paid. And I find that the people that end up moving towards ESOPs, especially longer tenured ESOPs like yourself, had that mentality to begin with before they became an ESOP.
Yeah, I don't think you can flip the switch one day and have an ESOP mentality, because there's just back in 2006, 2007, when my wife's family decided to sell the business, our first agreement was with a consolidator out of Texas that owned about 70 printing companies. And what didn't go well with that was all about culture. And there were just some hiccups, some questions, some things that weren't absolutely clear. And it took about a week of due diligence before we decided that doesn't fit who we are. So an ESOP sale is not as lucrative as a financial sale, but it allows you a lot of other benefits.
So I want to, I love that, and I want to peel that back. But maybe we can kind of go back and kind of go through some of that situation, because I agree that you can't flip the switch, and I think you guys, it sounds like you ended up where you should be. But when your father-in-law was looking at this, what were the discussions with you and your family as far as, I mean, did your father-in-law say, "Hey, Roy, can you buy it?" I mean, what were all the options, and what even triggered the process before all those options were explored? So maybe kind of take us through part of that journey that you guys went through?
Yeah. Well, it was predicated on my father-in-law and mother-in-law wanting to build a succession plan. And they were in their 60s at the time. Now he's 79 and she's 75. But at the time, they were thinking retirement's imminent, 62 to 65. And they were just trying to figure out what are the next steps, because they had at that time a daughter in the business, another daughter associated with the business. And there was a point where my wife and I looked at buying the business. And at the time, the whole digital transformation in the printing industry had everyone anxious. So when we were looking at buying a company that was at an all-time high, it was hard for us to make that,
What's going to happen with digital?
right. So now in hindsight, we're bigger. Well, we're not bigger today. We were bigger in 19 than we were in 2019 than we were then. This year, there's a little global pandemic that's kind of gotten in the way of some business. But it was something my wife and I looked at. At the time, we chose not to make that leap because it was a not a small amount of money.
Right.
So at that point, once we decided that the company would be sold, then we got with a local company that valued it, put it on the market, sent out the book to about 10 different potential buyers, and we interviewed 4 different companies. And one of them made the most sense because they were in our industry. They were a consolidator. It gave us a lot of resources. But in the end, it turned out, after due diligence, we decided it wasn't the right fit for us. And that was on a Friday. On Monday, we ended the deal. And then in about 6 weeks, we were officially an ESOP. So
holy cow.
it was, well, because we had already built, the valuation was done. So much of the paperwork or the process was already complete. And we have a local gentleman, his name's Tim Yoakum, who at the time was very well known nationally, and his whole life was ESOPs. So when we started meeting with Tim, we could just make decisions so much faster because of his experience.
Okay, that's interesting, because Pat, his experience was kind of similar to that, where they took it to market, didn't go up very well, turned around, did an ESOP.
Yeah.
With Harlow HR, Harlow, and now it's Impact. But going back a couple steps, Roy, I'm curious, and when your father-in-law and mother-in-law were thinking about this next step, like the succession, I'm curious, because I think a lot of people, there's all of a sudden this inherent, I got to do something, and I don't know what it is. So this journey starts.
Yeah.
And a lot of painful education, potentially wrong steps, money, all, emotions. Were they trying to solve, in their word of succession? Because I think it's a commonly used word, but I think there's so much ambiguity in what does that even mean, or even the word exit. Because were they trying to solve for their role, to transition their role, or were they trying to monetize their asset to figure out, is this in the estate planning wealth world? Was there a certain one of those that, or both, that they were trying to accomplish?
It was a little bit of both. I mean, when Jim was in the process of it, he was thinking about retirement. They had some plans, they had some thoughts. And my mother-in-law was our top salesperson at the time.
Okay.
And she would grind really hard and really long. And I think she was more interested in a retirement lifestyle because she had worked her fingers to the bone type of thing. She would take work home every night, do things on the weekends, be in front of customers all day. But in the end, it was about how do you take the 100 people who had spent on average 15 years helping you do something and not cause them pain.
Yeah.
So the ESOP, I mean, well, you know the structure of an ESOP. The company is, in a sense, given to the employees out of future earnings, but it's given. So we've had truck drivers. We had a truck driver retire about a year ago. And at his retirement party, he made a speech to everybody and said, the ESOP changed my life. It allows me to be able to retire. And that I think was more of a driver in the decision than anything else.
I love it. It's in, so a couple comments on that is like that and I'm curious on how you've solved your mother-in-law's challenge, because when I experience, whether it's people that are in the audience of the presentations that I give Roy, or the constant dialogue of, a lot of owners wait till they want out, and an ESOP does not solve your mother-in-law's quota grinding away in sales, because you're just changing the shares of the entity, right? So where they go. So if someone wants it, like, oh, ESOP, I can walk away now, and it's like, no, it doesn't change anything operationally about the company.
No.
And I think that's where by the time someone gets to that burnout stage, it's too late to think about this.
Yeah.
Because they have to do hard work to make a sustainable business that has future cash flow for the employees.
I think had they wanted to have a quick exit, a total exit, we could have never done an ESOP.
Right.
It doesn't fit the model. What it fit really well was Jim could stay involved. And over time, he had control over his life. Whereas if it was sold to a financial buyer, you lose that control. So it's worked out well in that sense.
So I want to go down that path in a second. How did you solve your mother-in-law's quota challenge?
Well, she was our top rep, and she opened what were at the time our two largest accounts. So historically, in our industry, a salesperson finds prospects, opens doors, quotes projects, begins projects, does billing, does follow-up. So they're called salespeople, but they're almost like sales/account management.
Yep.
So what we did with my mother-in-law is we've always had CSRs who do a lot of the processing and the small details. But we hired 2 account managers that came in to support her. And over about a 2-year period, one of the account managers ended up with the same level of relationship with the customers. And those 2 customers, they're both still top 10 customers, but one of them still our number 1 customer. So it was about hiring a really quality person and then giving her time to build that relationship.
So I love that, because that's one of the topics I want to talk about is like where the value in the business was, and how you guys really assess the value and how that's changed as you've got ownership mentality going into this. But before we do that, when you look at the options between the consolidator and kind of the situation I explained to you about my family business, what happened, probably very similar approach that would have had versus the route you guys went. When you think about, because like the ESOP is based on the discounted cash flow, so it's all based on the future cash flow of the business. And you've mentioned that it's given to the employees through future value, but the owners get they identify the value, and then it's the structure of how much money they get up front versus over time. So there's a liquidation of that asset.
Yeah.
And then there's the tax benefits, and so we can get into some of that. But how did what was your insights about the value and how that ESOP valued it versus the strategic? And then maybe kind of lend some insight of like, I don't know what the deal structure is. You don't have to give any numbers. I'm just kind of curious in the deal structure that you guys went through.
Well, the initial valuation, obviously, one of the ways was a multiple of EBITDA. Another was a multiple of free cash flow. Another was an asset-based model because the printing industry, where a $19 million company may have $12 to $14 million worth of hard assets that have to be bought every 8 to 12 years.
Farming.
So that was part of it. And then just, our history, we didn't. The accounting firm took a 36-month history and plotted earnings based on that. But business for it's all about cash flow, because that's what allows you to be here tomorrow. And then we had a certain amount of cash in the company as well. So it was some hard assets and some future free cash flow.
Did you guys, when you guys went and did the valuation and then you guys turned into the ESOP, did your mother-in-law and father-in-law take any bank financing, and then the seller note? What was the kind of the structure on that?
Well, from an ESOP perspective, it was 100% seller note.
Okay, cool.
So my in-laws didn't need the cash today. And they also realized if in 7 or 8 years we had a bad year, the banks are a little less forgiving than two people whose heart and soul is into something. So they did 100% seller finance and just divided it up over so many years, and that was the annual cost.
Well, I think what's really cool about that, Roy, is, and I mean, first of all, you're not paying any taxes anymore to be able to afford that those seller notes. But I think, so when we talk about our intentional growth principles, we've got the first one is like, what do you want as an individual? And the second one are your financial targets. And if you don't need the money up front, awesome opportunity and option. But also, you can take some bank financing. So if you need a little bit up front or a third or half, but it just shows you, to your point about flexibility and control, like what your father-in-law was kind of driving towards. When you looked at this, so as you're explain to the listeners how you guys went about teaching the employees, like how did the announcement go? What was the reaction, and how is that when you say the flip in the light switch? How do you take the dimmer and continue to move it up?
Well, I guess when Jim first announced the company was up for being sold, there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear.
You guys announced that to the company?
Well, after we had signed the deal.
Okay.
And there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of trepidation. And when the deal didn't happen, and within about a week, we announced we're doing an ESOP, it was literally a room full of people that started clapping because awesome. They felt secure again. And then it was, we're 13 years in, and I would say, there's a percentage of people that think like owners, but it's a hard switch to flip in someone's mind because, if I've worked here 30 years and I spent 17 years of it just getting a paycheck, and then after that, seeing, some shares come my way and seeing the value of those shares. And then it's still not even real until people start retiring and saying, I just got a check for $200,000. So that's where it is. And then people start to believe because they see their friends actually seeing some money out of it. So we do a annual meeting where we bring in an outside person for education. We have a financial meeting once a year where we share financials and talk about how the previous year went, talk about bonuses. Then we have an annual meeting from an ESOP standpoint. And then we do a quarterly meeting where we're updating our KPIs. So that's gross sales, net gross income, some sales related functions, and some other key goals that we have. So it's basically a strategic plan update that includes some financial numbers. So that's, it's formally 5 or so times a year. And then just an ongoing, our ESOP education committee meets monthly and then goes through questions from people and how do we explain it, and publishes notes so that way people can read things. There's a lot of complexity to it. It can become overwhelming.
For someone that is gravitating towards this idea, but one of the reservations might be what you just said, because I can't believe how many people just don't understand this world. However, it's such an amazing option. People hear me get so excited about it, and I think it's probably overdone because of how much people don't know about it. It's not like it's not perfect for everybody, but you almost need to bang the drum harder so that way you just hear it compared to everything else that's out there.
Right. Yeah.
So when you hear someone say, like, when you hear, oh, ESOPs are they too complicated? What would you say to someone with reservations around that?
I would say the biggest thing is maintaining company control, because an ESOP still run through a board of directors. So if an owner looking to transition doesn't want a hard exit from the company, this is a 5, 6, 7, 10-year process where they can still have a lot of involvement, a lot of input. Now, the downside is the annual valuation, the share disbursements, the paying out of the shares. But compared to what it gives you, that's a manageable problem.
So, and maybe put some tangible stuff compared to what it gives you, where you're not paying taxes anymore.
Right.
You got more cash flow.
Yeah.
So hopefully be able to pay for the valuation and some of these costs, right? And technically your father-in-law and mother-in-law, or whoever the owner is of the ESOP, they get their payment, right? So I think that's one of the biggest challenges, where like people are like, wait a second, I can't do whatever I want with the distributions anymore. And it's like, well, hypothetically, you got paid $10 million. So that was your payout. And so it's hard to because you're selling the business, but you're still running it.
Yeah. That is an issue, I'm sure, depending on how people historically have dealt with distributions. If they've been more conservative, that's less of an issue. If they've paid for a lot of board meetings in northern Italy, it'll be an issue. So we have friends that are part of organizations that it's part of the culture just to have high-level meetings and the travel, but that was never really our culture.
Mm-hmm. So
it wasn't a transition for us, but it is a different way of thinking of it. And the biggest advantage is no state and federal taxes until the share owner sells the shares. So the company, the ESOP, can take the monies that were spent in taxes and pay down the debt, and then over time use that to fund the share buybacks.
So as far as it relates to this cash flow topic too, so you can pay down the seller's note fairly fast, because the math hopefully works out to the point where your savings and tax is paying the note. Right. And then future share buybacks, which you're just referring to people that are retiring, quitting, or
right.
Or whatever. Yeah. What did that do to your business as it relates to competitive advantage and investing in value growth compared to before?
I would say the biggest competitive advantage is being able to share with a customer stories. We had a lady on second shift with some hang tags, and the job ticket said, drill a hole in the hang tags. And for years, we've done these hang tags with a drill hole. And she thought, we did these about a month ago and they didn't do the drill portion of it. So instead of just drilling it, which she would have been totally within her rights to do because that's what the job ticket said, she stopped the job, emailed the plant manager. We checked with the salesperson the next morning and found now how these hang tags are done. They're fed into a machine that punches them and puts string in them. so they shouldn't be drilled. So the next morning we boxed up the tags and delivered them. And that type of thinking happens all the time, because now people are over time starting to see, if we make good profit, which is from doing a great job for a fair price, I see my share value grow over time. And that starts to impact how people view things, and the peer pressure that if there's a group of 10 and one of them's not pulling their weight, the other 9 start to push on that because they see it's all
You're affecting my retirement.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting, Roy. There's someone in our industry that was an ESOP and they sold to a private equity firm.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people that work there, and they said, for decades they were an ESOP, and they were like, you can tell in the company kitchen that we're not an ESOP anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard to it's very interesting. Like when you think about it, if you're an owner and you're the only owner right now, and yes, you could even have a really good culture, but people are getting paid wages, where the equity ownership benefit is for just an individual, and not this. I mean, that's capitalism. It's beautiful, right? But this is like a hybrid. I had a gentleman from Iowa, Folion, 135-year-old family business ESOP, and he's like, it's the purest form of capitalism because everybody's getting equity at the same time, and it's just amazing. It's hard to quantify. I think he said, if you were to call someone at 4:55, what would your employees do?
Yeah.
And and it's hard to you can kind of extrapolate in your mind how that would impact the business. But now that you've been doing this for 13 years, are you able to see it from not only the culture, but the finances? And I gotta imagine it's,
from a culture perspective, it's always improving. Financially, thankfully, we've always done okay. And, that's stayed, which is a big deal because that impacts future valuation. But I would say your statement about it's 4:55 and the phone rings or someone comes to the door, that's where it really makes the difference. And it's those soft things that cause customers to come back time and time and time again. We had a customer come in 2 days ago, and she works for a local university, and she was looking at a job on press as they were setting it up. And she and the pressman have known each other for 5 years because of a working relationship. And she approved the project on press, and the pressman had already pulled some press sheets for her to take home with her. And then so she grabbed the press sheets and hit him on the back of the head because she wanted him to do something different. And the pressman came into me, 20 minutes later and said, I want to file a complaint against a customer because she abused me. And they're laughing about it. And then I'm talking to the sales guy, and the customer said, next time she comes in, she's going to change something on press so that the pressman can't use the sheets he already pulled. And I think that's the side of it that people don't see, because once, our pressman's been with the company over 30 years. His heart's in it. He works hard. He's trying to do the right thing. And now he'll be able to retire with another chunk of asset that will help fund retirement. So that's the side of it that it's hard to put in a press release.
Mm-hmm. Because it's an ongoing deal that it's like the fabric that glues it all together.
Yeah.
And so when you have going back to the ownership and control, and so the fact that your father-in-law is still involved in being able to work the 3 days a week, I think there are 200 and some episodes of the podcast used to be called Life After Business, because a lot of people that own companies, they don't have one.
Yeah.
And that's why I changed the name. And you have this ability to kind of flow into this role that you want, but overall in ownership, you don't have all of a sudden this socialist company where everybody's voting on everything.
Right. Yeah.
Can you explain from your situation, what was the setup from making decisions, the board, the trustee? Kind of just give a quick setup and how this problem or challenge was tackled.
Yeah. Generally, from an ESOP perspective, we share with people. It's just like if I own shares in Coca-Cola, I can't go down to the truck driver and say, change your route. He would just go, well, you have no authority. And it's the same in an ESOP. The employees are represented by a trustee, and then the board is run, or the company's run via a board of directors. So that's really no different in one sense how it operates than pre-ESOP. As I think as Jim transitions out, things will change some because we will bring in a different level of board member that will have more input. But it's still, if we buy a piece of equipment, if we make an acquisition, if we look at a new service offering, that's all done by the board of directors directing an executive team, just like it was in a sense before. I mean, it was my wife's family that were the board members, and her dad was the CEO. So it was one and the same, really.
What because like maybe kind of just a cliff note version of like what the relationship is with the trustee, because I think that's maybe a little bit of a hazy concept to some people. The trustee's not coming in and saying, Roy, that piece of equipment, like what is the actual role of the trustee?
The trustee is a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the shareholders, the employees, are not taken advantage of. So up until about 3 years ago, our CFO was our trustee.
Okay.
So she would sit in meetings with a hat on as trustee, as in, is anything happening that's harmful to the shareholder? Now we've transitioned to an external, but we may interact with an external trustee a couple of times a year. They look at the valuation, they may get involved in some small detail, but once the trustee is comfortable from a fiduciary standpoint that the employees are being treated fairly, that's the end of their role. They're not talking about other things.
And maybe another example would be is like, hey, all of a sudden Hopkins Printing is getting into plastic straw manufacturing in California and burning through a bunch of cash, and they're going, wait a second.
Yeah.
Why are you doing that?
Yeah. Well, that's where a trustee would definitely get involved. And, it's the company that does the annual financial review, the company that does the valuation. We come, we sit and meet with them, and they talk about where's the business going, how are customers, how are employees, how are key personnel. So they are influencing it, but they're only really getting involved if so far there hasn't been anything to get involved in, really. So it's more of an advisor status, unless what you said, we got into a type of business that was totally different, that we had no skill set in, and we were burning through the capital. So
what has this done over the last 13 years as far as hiring and recruiting, retaining employees?
It's that part of it is huge, because my wife is director of HR, so she does almost all of the hiring and all of the higher level recruiting. And she has a storyline now where you can tell somebody, honestly, you've run a piece of equipment for our competitor across town for 10 years. And once you get paid every Friday, that's where it ends. Now you can come run a piece of equipment for 10 years. And then when you retire, you can get a chunk of money. And it's, I don't think money is the most important thing, but I think people that live week to week, that struggle sometimes when, the transmission goes out in your car and you don't have $2,000 in the bank, a help with retirement goes a long ways. And it brings just kind of, it settles, it calms people.
I love how you just worded that, Roy. I've gotten pretty passionate about this whole, like, I mean, some of the people that I'm following that pretty closely, like the Ray Dalias of the world, Jack Stack's new book is How to Change the Game and Fix the Inequality Gap. I mean, the reality is, the system's kind of hard. I mean, for people that are making $15-20 an hour, I mean, you're netting $2-3 grand a month. you're not saving for retirement. Like,
Right.
you're not sending your kids to college. And like the fact that you can like get these people who are humans to like not think about this and to come into work and just
Yeah.
have fun. Like, I mean, I don't know how like when you're thinking about it from an ownership perspective, I mean, that makes a better company, better culture, make more money. I mean, like the ripple effect of that is pretty
Yeah.
huge.
Well, I think one of Jim's goals was to do something so that the company could succeed past him. And this was the best bet for that. I mean, the company that we almost did a deal with, they were a publicly traded company. They were then bought by a larger publicly traded company in the printing industry. And since then, probably, well, a chunk of their plants have been closed down because it didn't make financial sense.
Like a carcass of what it eventually.
Right.
And what it's interesting, Roy, is like, well, like it'd be interesting if Jim were to go back, and I don't know if he's ever done it, is over the last 13 years, how much he's made off the business net from tax savings to I don't know what kind of estate planning was done in the mix of all this, like, and the pay that he's probably still making from 3 days a week
Right.
compared to if you would have sold to that. Yeah, you might get a 10 to 25% premium to sell into a strategic that can have that overlap, but I would argue that most of the time you probably end up making more money over the long haul with an ESOP.
Well, the tax advantages to the seller are significant, and when you self-finance it, you get the value of the shares plus an interest rate. And if you stay involved in the company, like you said, healthcare is covered. All these small things are covered, and you still get paid, and you have a purpose for getting up in the morning. So
Right. I mean, it's interesting because I've had people who are like, yeah, well, I'm going to make $10 million and blah blah blah. It's more than I've in ESOP. I'm like, yeah, but if you could actually go in and still be the CEO, pay yourself $200,000 for being the CEO,
right.
$200,000 times 7 years, and you control it, and you get the healthcare benefit. I mean,
Yeah.
that's real cash flow, right? You're going to have to go figure out. I mean, how many Vistage shares or EO chairs or people that are like they're just trying to bring in their annual income.
Yeah.
Because they sold the business.
Yeah. Well, I guess if you could sell a business for 10 million and you could make 7% on your money, but you still have to leave part of that in there to grow it for inflation.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll be clearing 200 or 300 grand a year, which is a lot of money. But if you sell a business for 10 million, you were probably making that kind of money.
Mm-hmm.
So you can burn through that money, not quickly, but you can burn through it.
I've watched people do it quickly,
Yeah.
depending on your lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
That's so, one thing, and I don't know what degree of open book management or ownership thinking, because I know there's some of the kind of the business that you're in, and then there's professional services where there's
Right.
there's engineers or architects, kind of a different makeup than some of the staff that you might have. Has this impacted your ability to withstand some of these recessions and hiccups in the economy over the years? I mean, what has that done for you guys compared to maybe some of your competitors?
Well, I think, during COVID, through the first quarter of the year, our sales were up. And then through the second quarter, they were down. And we started a program called 20% Shared Pain. And we had 100 people volunteer to take a day a week off and not get paid for it. Now, anybody can do that for a little while. That's not a long-term solution. And then with the PPP money, we brought everybody back, and now we're part of a program with the state called Shared Work. So in the last 5 months, we've not laid anybody off. And if we can get back the vast majority of our business by next year, we won't have to lay anybody off. And there was a 32% drop in GDP second quarter. So that's, our managers have gone zero overtime. How do we get around this and still meet the customer's needs? People have been willing to take time off without pay. People have been willing to just do extra. And that's all part of that ESOP culture because they see a long-term benefit. So that's a big deal.
And it is a big deal because I think, you can get a great culture together if you're not ESOP owned, but then it's
Yeah.
like there's still this underlying whether it's subconscious or it's truly part of the culture of like, yeah, we're doing this and we'll do this because I like my colleagues and I like the company, but the owner is still making a bunch of money. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to avoid that, no matter how good your culture is.
Yeah, I don't think you can avoid that because the thought is always, no matter what's happening with me, the owner's still drinking champagne every night.
Well, and right, and there is such a disconnect because I see both sides super clear, and they're both real because perspective, perception is reality. Where owners got all the personal guarantees, you're the one on the
Yeah.
hook for the risk, you're the one that's losing cash. I mean, so super real, super legit. And a lot of employees, and depending on your workforce, don't understand that you're 19 million. They think you have 19 million in cash.
Right.
You know
And
what
they
I mean?
think that's what you make a year, not what
Exactly.
you sell a year.
Yeah, by the way, we lost money last year. Didn't on
Yeah.
night. Yeah, it's a totally different perspective. But I think it's just interesting when you have it in there together, and it's it's an interesting approach. When you think about like the succession planning of your family, and like you've got different, going back to like truly what is succession planning meaning, how's an ESOP into that, as you have, how did the ESOP have a role in the different stakeholders? Because there's a lot of people, Roy, that I know that have
Right.
partners, family members, where like your mother and father-in-law literally wanted different things. One wanted a retirement lifestyle, one wanted the business, work in the business for a long time. Like, so you have this ability to like kind of connect a lot of dots. I mean, any suggestions for people that have multiple stakeholders and how this option could play a role in that?
I think if your stakeholders want their cash and need to go somewhere quickly, it's not a good option. But most people, I believe most, that spend 30, 40 years building something want to see it long term succeed. And that's where the stakeholder, really cared. I mean, there were the family that owned it. One ended up not working in the business, one still does, another one's fully retired, and another one does part time. So they've all been able to kind of get what they need out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a longer term perspective. Now it's also a longer term responsibility because the company still has to be run, the work still has to be done, decisions still have to be made. So it's not a gimme. It's still a business.
Decisions have to be made, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's really, like I said, like if you're burnt out and you want to like go somewhere immediately and you want your role gone,
yeah.
not a
It's not the right option. But
right.
I don't. I think that's the minority of owners because you're not going to build something of value unless your heart's in it. And I just I have a hard time thinking of very many people that would cut and run and allow a company to suffer.
Yeah, there's I've seen some out there.
Yeah,
But it's interesting. I had a guy on my podcast, Carl Allen, a few weeks or months ago, and he said that 95% of the companies that sell or in the lower and middle market are first generation founder led.
yeah,
So, I mean, and he even said that of the data that he had found that the business culture and employees was 75% of their decision over the money. Even the people that are on
yeah,
the lower market who need the money.
yeah. I fully believe that stat's true because I just I know a lot of business owners just from customers and friends, and true, the money does matter. I mean, I don't see a business owner saying, "Okay, I'll take 30 cents on the dollar because I really care."
Right.
But if they take 90 cents on the dollar because they can still take care of the people that helped them, I think most of them are willing to make that deal.
And what do you think is the biggest challenge from other friends or entrepreneurs that from understanding this or going down this route, or like what are the biggest challenges?
I think it's the false perception that an ESOP then has 100 bosses instead of 100 employees. It's that thinking that everybody gets a vote on everything.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think once somebody grasps that how the business is operated doesn't change, it's a different perspective. Because if I think of it's employee owned, implies that each employee is an owner and they can go in and do what they want, but it's actually each employee is a shareholder, and the shareholders are represented by the trustee, and the trustee goes by the direction of the board. So
and then even a layer on that is the shares, the shareholders are based on a percentage of payroll. So usually the owners and the executive team are the biggest chunks of payroll anyway.
Right. Yeah, we did it initially based on payroll, but also part of the equation was based on how long someone had been there. So we had some people that did not make a lot of money, but they had been there 30 years, still do pretty well with it.
Oh, so they vested faster or
Yeah.
a higher percentage?
Well, they vested faster and they got a larger share allocation based on tenure.
And I think you just put a huge bow on the fact that you can be creative based
Right.
on people.
Yeah.
No one told you to do that or Jim to do that, right? It was something that was chosen to do.
Right. Yeah. I think if somebody wants to go down the ESOP path, they need to get some really good advisors, because your typical support staff, your accountant and your attorneys, don't have the background of an ESOP. And I'm sure there are people who've gone down the route with bad advice and regret it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and unfortunately, that's where you Google it, and like it's so interesting. Like as I've gotten educated on this over the years, it's like I've come to the conclusion that because the operation of the business doesn't change at all, it's just ownership, and because you can be so flexible with it, all the bad things that have happened have been self-inflicted based on the advisors or the owner and how they set it up. It's like you set it all up, so whatever happened as a result of
Right. Yeah, there are plenty of non-ESOP examples of things that aren't set up right and go poorly, and there are ESOP examples of it. So
exactly right.
Yeah.
As we're wrapping up here, what is maybe one takeaway if you got listeners that are tuning in, that there's a lot of people that have been interested as I've been covering some of this topic over the years. One thing that you would leave them with that would help them make progress on learning more about this, or one thing that maybe is I don't know, maybe I'm searching too hard, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe what would be your takeaway?
I think if probably one of the best sources is the National Association, because they'll be able to point you to local experts that you can actually sit down and talk to. And I think if somebody has a desire to have a legacy that's positive and take care of the employees that help them get where they are, an ESOP is a fabulous outcome. So I
giving it away, you still get paid for it too.
Right. Yeah, you're still selling it. It's just a different structure. Yeah.
Okay, two questions then. One is, what does the word intentional mean to you?
Intentional to me is, am I living my life on purpose? Do I get up and do what I'm going to do every day with a goal in mind? So I know when I come to work, from a sales perspective and marketing, we have 4 goals this year, and I know I can list them. I know intentionally when I wake up with my wife every day, what's my job at home? To be a better husband and a better partner. And intentionally how our kids are treated and what opportunities they have. So I like intentionality.
I love it. Second question, what's the best place to find more about you, about the business? What contact information you want to leave with the audience?
Probably for the company, it's just hopkinsprinting.com, all one word. And then from the website, you can find our Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn feeds. And then my email is just rwaterhouse@hopkinsprinting.com. And I'm a pretty easy LinkedIn find. Just look at Roy Waterhouse. Waterhouse is not a common name, so it's pretty easy. And I'm on LinkedIn every day doing something.
Yeah, and you put some good content out there, which is why we're here.
Yep.
Roy, it's been a blast having you on the show. I appreciate the time.
Thank you very much, Ryan, for the opportunity.